Welcome back to Storytime. In today's episode, we're going to be continuing our reading of Machines and Men, but before we jump into it, just a quick reminder. If you are enjoying this content, or if you'd like to submit your own story for our consideration, you can do so at r/Creant World on Reddit using the Flare Storytime. Just as a quick reminder, Of Machines and Men is a story that is possibly not appropriate for all audiences, as there are strong language and sexual situations. Viewer discretion is advised. And now, Machines and Men, Chapter 12, Dreams versus Fantasies. Stephen's sleep was fitful, to say the least. He tossed and he turned. His mind was full of dreams. He dreamed that he was chasing a faceless girl down a long hallway, the same dream that he had had before Vera had arrived, but it was subtly different this time. In his dream, he chased the girl into a large palace made of crystal and managed to catch her hand in a chamber of mirrors. The girl turned to face him, and he saw that she was a statue, a Greek statue, like so many in art museums. When he grabbed her hand, the hand of the statue broke off in his grasp. Why should he choose? The statue asked its mirrored reflections. Only now they weren't reflections. They were women. He knew their faces. Some he had dated. Some he had lusted for. Some were only half remembered. He looked around at the women around him and felt afraid for some reason. He was still holding the arm of the statue, but now the finger was pointing, the arm straight. You have to make up your mind, the statue, who suddenly loomed over him like some idol, told him. It's important. Stephen walked around the hall of mirrors looking at the women one by one. It seemed to him that the mirrors were more like cellophane in front of Barbie doll boxes, though he could still see his reflection in the mirrors as well. As he looked down the line, he saw Kimmy, Kat, Amber, Nicole, Rachel. He knew them all. The light over their heads seemed to be red-tinted, and they looked like mannequins, made of plastic and dressed in old 1940s fashions. Down at the end of the line was Becky, only she had on an obviously fake wig. He stood and examined her for a moment, but somehow knew that she had already been sold. Where is Vera? Stephen thought wildly. He looked around but couldn't find her. There were only 3 compartments he hadn't checked. He found Vera in the first one. She was dressed again in the windbreaker and running pants she had come from the factory in, but her eyes were closed and her chest wasn't rising or falling. He found himself inside the compartment, his arms around her. He kissed her, but her face changed before his eyes. She became a sort of female version of the Tin Woodman from The Wizard of Oz, complete with large funnel for a hat and over-the-top silver makeup. Oil can, she said, though her lips never moved. Running now, Stephen looked around wildly for an oil can. He didn't know why it was so important, but he knew where he could find one. Opening a door, he found himself at his cubicle at work, and there was a huge gas can under his desk. Stephen tried to run with the gas can, but felt like his feet were glued to the ground. All he could manage was a tortoise-like crawl. He found Vera, or at least a ventriloquist dummy of Vera sitting on a desk. He poured the gasoline all over her, and her eyes slowly opened. I've got no strings to hold me down, to make me laugh or to make me frown, she began to sing. Stephen stuffed his hand in her mouth so she couldn't finish the verse, but her voice was all around him, now booming in his ears. I've got no strings, as you can see. There are no strings on me. The sound of Vera's voice faded into background music like the sort heard in elevators. Stephen found himself in a huge warehouse. Enormous shelves towered over him with pallets of very odd stuff on them. Some of the pallets had huge Chinese urns, some had tricycles, and one had enormous stuffed rabbits the size of a couch. Stephen looked up at the sign above the lane that read Housewares, Garden, Bathroom, and Tile. He started to walk down the aisles, pushing a red plastic shopping cart. He found the section he was looking for, a massive collection of books of all sorts, and began to put them into the cart. As he reached for one called The World of Tomorrow, he paused. He had heard Meg's voice on the other side of the shelf. Peeking through the books, Stephen saw her sweatshirt off, trying to reach something on a high shelf, or at least he thought it was Meg. But as he approached, she turned to face him, and he found that the woman before him was a female version of himself. She kissed him, and they fell to the floor. They made love right there, and Stephen became convinced that he was both the girl being fucked and the man doing the fucking. The scene had changed into a wood-paneled room, and Stephen was furiously masturbating. He didn't care. The shapeless, faceless people were watching him. He found that he was rubbing himself with his severed arm of the statue. Only it wasn't a statue anymore. It was a blank, featureless robot that was missing its arm. Throwing the arm away from him, Stephen watched it spin off into space and land in a field of tall grass. Somehow he knew he would have to find the arm again, because it was the last part he needed to finish the sculpture of Vera that he had made out of Legos. He tried searching the grass, but he couldn't find it. Looking around the wood-paneled room, Stephen found a katana and an umbrella stand, and started in on the grass with slashing cuts. As he cut, the katana became a scythe in his hands, and the field became made not of grass, but of cheap paperback versions of the Bible, the ones usually found in motel rooms. Stephen cut the books with the scythe, but couldn't find the arm he had been looking for. But he had to find it. It was important. Meg needed the arm to make a snowman that looked over at him with Vera's eyes. Stephen opened his eyes and sat up fully awake. His room was normal. Everything was as it should be. Vera breathed rhythmically next to him. It had been a very weird dream. So weird, in fact, that the moment Stephen opened his eyes, the first thing that came to his mind was a strong feeling that he wanted to look up its meaning. He reached for his smartphone, which was charging on the bedside table, and started looking up dream interpretations. According to the website Stephen found, robots in dreams indicated that he was going about life in a boring, mechanical way. Women in his dreams represented love and also temptation. Dolls and statues represented wanting to escape his present problems and an immature nature of the opposite sex. No surprises there. It all sounded very woolly to Stephen, who recalled reading somewhere that dreams were the subconscious mind's way of dealing with thoughts and desires from the waking life. To Stephen, it seemed like the meaning of his dream was fairly cut and dry. Crux of the matter was how Vera, Meg, and even himself had factored into this mental tug-of-war about his feelings. The fact that he had seen robots and statues and dolls so frequently spoke not of some hidden desire, but of a literal robot, of Vera. The women he had dated, the office, even probably cutting the Bibles had represented Meg. The sex with a female version of himself was a little troubling, but Stephen guessed the most important part of it was that the only woman he had been with in his dream was him, a human. Once the robotic hand had been introduced to the scene, he had gone from having sex to masturbating. It had to be linked. So what was his brain trying to tell him? He had searched for Vera, tried to save her, had wanted her to be complete, but it had been the image of Meg that had appeared last in his mind. Meg, the thinking, feeling, flawed, imperfect human being. He wanted to love Vera, wanted to be happy that he had the best girlfriend in the world, but it was fairly clear to Stephen that his subconscious was trying to tell him otherwise. He looked over to where Vera lay. She was so beautiful, the moonlight highlighting her hair, her soft skin, and perfect body. He could gladly spend the rest of his life with a woman like that. Who was he to complain? She was everything he wanted. She was talented, smart, funny, into the same things he was. She was loving and caring and kind, everything in short that he had waited so long for. And now that he had it, he felt dissatisfied. Stephen was sick with himself. Vera hadn't done anything wrong, and yet he was still looking for more. He was no different from Becky. That realization made him pause and blink in sudden epiphany. That was it. That was the reason she had left. It wasn't that he hadn't been good enough. It was that he was simply not what she had really needed. Sometimes people, in all their fallibility, couldn't tell what it was they really wanted. He had thought he had wanted a companion to share special moments with, but what he really wanted was a girlfriend, a real girlfriend, with all her quirks and habits. And sure, she would get on his nerves sometimes, and they would fight and argue, but ultimately, it would bring them closer together. It was something that he knew he could never get from Vera, no matter how much training her positronic brain received. He crawled back into bed, and Vera rolled over and snuggled up against him. He put his arm over her, but he lay awake, staring at the ceiling hopelessly. He didn't want to hurt Vera. He really didn't. He loved her. He really did, but it just wasn't with all his heart. Still, he didn't want to see her upset, didn't want to hurt her. He wished with all his might that she was a real girl. Or, barring that, he wished he could change. He wished he could be the sort of man who was satisfied with what Vera could offer him. He wished he could take the unconditional affection she had for him and be satisfied with that, because it was what she deserved. It hurt him more deeply than he could express that he couldn't. Maybe he was a robot himself. Not a robot of metal and plastic, but a machine of flesh and blood, pre-programmed to act a certain way. The heart wants what it wants, no matter what the brain is looking for. With these thoughts in mind, Stephen slowly fell asleep again. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that episode, hit that like button. And for more episodes like this, subscribe. We upload once a week. You can also become a member of the Creant world by supporting us on social media at Reddit at r/Creant world, as well as on Twitter and Facebook. Until next time, thanks for watching.